If you're just logging in, we're giving everyone just a moment just to get settled as we continue to make sure that everyone is ready for our second support seminar. We're going to be covering special populations today. We're very excited to have you here. All right, it looks like the participants list is pretty steady right now. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. And for the sake of everyone's time, I want to make sure that we are getting you all the information in the time that we've allotted. So I'll go ahead and talk about our agenda. But before we get to that, I want to make sure that we introduce ourselves. So my name is Sarah Kahn. I'm a new school specialist here at TEA, helping to make sure that you all have the supports that you need for your Gen 30 application. And I'll let my colleagues go ahead and introduce themselves.
I will go ahead and jump in. Hi, everyone. Good to see some familiar names. I think most of you all know me at this point, but John Garland, I am Sarah's counterpart, and looking forward to Dr. Pappas's presentation today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. Brittany Flynn, New Skills Manager. I think y'all are going to get a lot of great information from Dr. Pappas and Dr. Rocha. And then again, we'll be using that Q&A, so we'll be watching it. So if you have questions, let us know.
I'll come off mute and introduce myself. Yep, I'm Dr. Scarlett Pappas, and I'm responsible for charter and virtual school monitoring, obviously for special education.
Thank you, Dr. Pappas. All right, John, maybe you can move us on to the agenda. So just so that you know where we're going today, we are going to open up with some just norms, giving you some updates. And then we'll have Dr. Pappas go over some special education, and then Dr. Rocha will join us and talk about emergent bilingual. And again, as Brittany already named, you can go ahead and use that Q&A function for any questions that you might have during those presentations, and we'll do our best to make sure that we're answering those. So just to go over some updates, norms, and questions. So we want to make sure that you know that this is all being recorded and that you will have access to the presentations after this. We will be posting them on our website, the Charter Applicant webpage. So just please know it does take a couple of days for it to get posted and uploaded. However, keep checking back on that. Additionally, we'll like to remind you that we do have office hours coming up November 21st. This is going to be at 1 p.m. So please make sure that you are finding that link. It's also located on the charter applicant page. And so just for some norms for today's session, while you're listening into Dr. Pappas, please make sure you're using that Q&A function. Note that you will not be able to use that chat. And so any questions that you would like addressed, we highly recommend you putting those into that Q&A. We also recommend that you just have a copy of your narrative document as she's going through the special education portions. You can also be looking at the questions that we have listed for you there. And then remember that we are bound to answer those logistical and technical questions, and we can't really go into the design of your schools as this is a competitive process. So there are some questions that we won't be able to answer, and we'll just name that for you. So we appreciate you for understanding that. So with that, we're going to go ahead and talk first about the special education criteria. I'm going to pass that over to John.
Yeah, again, as Sarah said, we're just going to anchor our conversation. Dr. Pappas will be providing a very extensive deep dive, even though it's still high level at the same time, but anchoring this in the criteria to which you will be scored on. I'm not going to read it verbatim, but at a high level, obviously, as you all are writing your responses, you want to ensure that you're identifying adequate numbers of teachers, paraprofessionals, etc. That your plans are both specific and realistic. We do not want you to just simply restate language. We want to make sure that your plan is really tailored to the model of your proposed school. Likewise, we want to see conversation about child find requirements, FAPE, 504 plans, IEPs. We also want to ensure that your board is going to have a plan to continually evaluate the effectiveness of those programs. And then obviously for those who are applying as an experienced operator, we want to ensure that you do identify both current and past issues, if any, of noncompliance. With that, I will go ahead and kick it over to Dr. Pappas.
All right, thank you. Let me get my deck set up. Uh-oh. Let me share my screen before I can share my deck. Just 1 second. And we'll go from there because I think you guys are seeing the right side.
Good to go.
Okay. So I like to ground us all in our True North statement. Together, we are committed to high expectations for strong systems that achieve equitable outcomes for every student with diverse needs. And what I'm going to be talking to you about today is really specific to charter monitoring for special education. I do like to kick us off by giving you a little bit of information about our differentiated monitoring support system. I do this because if you're approved to have a charter school, this is a process that your school will be put into. So this is updated annually, so always refer to our handbook. The Department of Review and Support at the TEA strives to improve the special education monitoring process for Texas local education agencies. The differentiated monitoring and support DMS process is designed to assist LEAs in improving services and facilitating positive student outcomes. The differentiated monitoring support system consists of 2 special education program monitoring pathways. What you see here is a targeted support review, and you see a cyclical review. Every single one of our charter schools in the state of Texas is actually every single LEA in the state of Texas goes through cyclical monitoring. I'll talk about that on the next slide, but we also put everyone through a review based on your performance where we may engage with you for targeted supports. I won't dive deep into any of these things, but you can see that there are required annual activities that you'll engage in. And then there are some things that depend on the data. Like I said before, every single local education agency, or LEAs, as we refer to you guys here at TEA, participates in that cyclical review on a 6-year rotating schedule. Cyclical reviews are intended to provide a comprehensive analysis of the LEA's special education program, including a review of the LEA's special education policies and practices. We do this by dividing all of the LEAs up into groups. So we're currently in our Cycle 6 Group 1, which runs from October to December. Group 2 will run from January through March, and Group 3 will run from April to June. We're excited because we are in our 6-year cycle, which means when we end this year, we will have reviewed we will have done a comprehensive review that includes student samples for every single district in the state of Texas. That will be a first time to my knowledge. I know I did a deck during the charter conference. Let's just say it's been a long time, if ever. But we're finishing that this year. It'll be a little bit of a celebration, but what will happen, we will go right into what we call phase 2, where it starts all over again. So we are continuously monitoring the quality of special education for students in the state of Texas, and we're supporting you guys. That's one of the reasons why we're called Review and Support. We do the review, but we also support. We also like to start supporting you guys from the beginning. So we do participate in the year 1 monitoring visit. Year 1 focuses on systemic processes in place to support your special education process from the absolute beginning. However, we know these systems will likely change as they are implemented in a new school setting. Therefore, during the year 1 visit, we join the authorizing team to provide feedback on things like the child find process that you develop, plans for professional development specific to special education. We let you know more about that self-monitor, the self-assessment that you have to do. And we also give you feedback on processes that you may want to put into place to monitor yourself for compliance. And then we also look at your staffing to make sure that you have the people that you need to support students with disabilities. These are requirements that we request from new charter operators. What I would say is I would take this and I would look at it and I would say, you know what? If I'm awarded a charter, these are the things that I really need to be thinking about and setting up in my school to have ready the day I open. So the process does not include a desk review or any student specific information we're looking for. What we really want to see is what is absolutely statutorily required for operation. I think this really does align quite well with your application. However, we also want to know how we can support you guys and provide any technical assistance for these things. So we're looking at Child Find. We expect to see board policies and procedures that you'll have to have linked in the legal framework. Other items we hope to see when we visit include any documents or resources that are used to track that kind of information. You're going to have to submit student data to the agency the first year that you open. So you're going to need to know what those things are and start collecting that data immediately. Professional development, we'll want to know about what you plan to cover in your convocation and how you plan to do teacher inductions for new special education staff. When we go on the year one visit, we love to see artifacts. With regard to the self-monitoring procedures, every LEA has to have a system for monitoring yourselves. You're going to want to think about how do we know how do we know that we're doing Child Find right? How do we know that we're on track for our evaluations? And we'll talk more about contract staff, but you're going to have to think about how am I sure that the IEPs that my staff are developing are compliant and that they're meeting Texas specific requirements. Effective staffing and operations, we tell every applicant that special education staff must be certified and under the direct supervision of a special education teacher if they are a para staff. We look for that evidence and we're happy to talk about that, but special education is a federal requirement. So all requirements for charter schools with regard to special education are exactly the same as they are for an ISD. This is where I'm going to launch into our frequently asked questions. I told John right before this meeting, this is really a high level. This is kind of the 101. Each one of these, we could probably do a presentation on each topic. So this is high level. But we'll go ahead and we'll start with the big questions. The first one is who supports special populations? Well, no shocker here. It's absolutely everyone. Please make sure that you're thinking about your trainings and what your general education staff will need to know about special education services as well. Special education requirements are the same for all LEAs. So admissions cannot be denied because a student has an individual education plan or identified as a student with a disability. Child Find requirements are the same and must be reported every year. All requirements for academic, functional, and related services must be described and implemented in the IEP. LRE stands for least restrictive environment. We'll talk more about that as we go through the deck, but it is your instructional arrangements. Lastly, you must have special education staff to conduct evaluations, oversee implementation of accommodations by instructional assistants, or implement the modifications to the curriculum. I love our self-assessment. This is going nowhere in phase 2. I will go ahead and tell you it is sticking around forever. Think of the self-assessment as a guidepost for looking at the strengths and weaknesses of a special education program. If I were a brand new special education director, this would be something that I would open up and say, do I have a process for that? Do I know what that is? Do I have a process for that? You know, each one of those things. The graphic shows each area that you should consider in a systemic review of your special education program. The blue represents the 7 prioritized areas. That's related to our monitoring process. However, all compliance items are required for completion, and we ask that LEAs do this every single year. So, like I said, as someone who's applying for a charter school, I would say, okay, if I'm developing my special education program, I need to have these already developed when I open my doors. I do want to say that these align with our DMS domains of implementation, thinking about student outcomes and family engagement to assist each LEA in focusing on systemic improvements and to be inclusive of compliance and best practices to support your students with disabilities. Please consider who will complete evaluations carefully and ensure that they meet all of the requirements. For example, parental consent is one of the first pieces of the evaluation process. That consent must be in the native language of the parent. It must describe the evaluation procedures and ensure that the parent agrees to the evaluation. It must be they need to understand that while they're agreeing, they can also revoke consent at any time. Please also know that the day the school receives the signed consent, that triggers timelines for completing the report. These are things that you have to actually track because you are responsible for reporting that data to the agency. That's one of the reasons why we say, this is your 101. Know that you're going to have to do these things from the beginning. And that's why we participate in the year one support visits, is to say, do you have a process for that? Because in July, you're going to have to submit that data. If you have questions about special education staff requirements, please review the federal and state requirements. In brief, all charter schools have the same requirements as all other LEAs to provide special education services. I've linked those there. You can look them up, but that's just my cliff notes. Many charter schools contract with a third party to provider to complete evaluations and provide related services. That's great. I think that's a good idea for you to consider. However, please understand that you as the charter school are still the responsible party for oversight and compliance. The simple thing that I tell my charter schools is, you're paying them. Make sure you're getting what you pay for and that it's high quality and that meets expectations for compliance. IEPs are legally binding. There's a lot of information that must be documented in the IEP. For example, the admission review and dismissal or ARD committee must make decisions about accommodations, modifications, the frequency and duration of services. You have to consider extended school year services annually, transition plans. There were updates and regs this year for that. They start at age 14. And if there is any training that should be provided to meet the student's needs. PLAFs. PLAFs are my favorite. I'm not gonna lie, they really are. PLAF stands for the present level of academic achievement and functional performance. That means the ARD committee must consider multiple factors, including the student's strengths and academic and non-academic needs in the development of an IEP. Therefore, the PLAF must establish an overall baseline of strengths and needs to determine the annual goals. Like I said, PLAFs, there's a 2-day training strictly on PLAFs. You get 30 seconds right here. Now we're going to go into least restrictive environment a bit more. Students with disabilities must receive their services in an environment with non-disabled peers to the maximum extent appropriate. Schools must ensure that a student is not removed from the general education environment unless the nature or severity of the disability is such that the student cannot be educated with supplementary aids or services. When we talk about our least restrictive environment, general education should always be the first consideration, but you do need to have a continuum of services. It shouldn't be the only kind of service that you provide. So the federal requirements also require that every LEA have like I said, a continuum of alternative placements to meet the needs of students with disabilities. That continuum must include instruction in regular education classes or mainstream instruction, but it may also include a resource room. It may also you may consider a self-contained setting, which means that the student is instructed away from non-disabled peers for more than half of the day. Charter schools may also find themselves needing to consider a homebound service, which means that they have a plan to provide services to a student who is served at home or in a hospital. Please know that these are just a few of the instructional arrangement settings in Texas. Let me clarify that an LEA does not have to have all of these placements available, but the placement must be made available if the ARD committee determines that it is appropriate to meet the student's needs. I talk a lot about contingency planning. You need to think about, if this child with this need walked into my classroom, how would we provide that service? We're presenting information that can be found in the IEP development guidebook. Linked here is a digital version of that technical assistance resource I recommend for every charter to provide your teachers and administrators. I think it's really important that everyone have access to that technical assistance for an IEP. The U.S. Department of Education enforces Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. As amended, it's often referred to as Section 504. It's a civil rights statute prohibiting discrimination against individuals with disabilities. Section 504 covers qualified students with disabilities who attend school receiving federal financial assistance. To be protected under Section 504, a student must be determined to, 1, have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity, or 2, have a record of such an impairment, or 3, be regarded as having such an impairment. In addition, Section 504 requires that school districts provide a free and appropriate public education, or FAPE, to qualified students in their jurisdictions with a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. Always get tongue-tied on that sentence. Please know that these terms have also updated. This is just a graphic image over here. A student may have a disability, but may not need special education services. However, to qualify for special education services, the student must have an identified disability. And as a result of that disability, they require special education services or related service. A lot of times we refer to that as specially designed instruction. So I want to give you some tips with the Child Find. 1, provide orientation and training to staff. There is documentation and timelines that the charter must be ready to support. Like I said, be ready to be operating with Child Find implementation the day your school opens. Take an active approach to identify students with disabilities. The law states that LEAs may not wait for others to refer students for services or to request an evaluation. Review your Child Find procedures annually and look for opportunities to improve continuously. Generate factors that may trigger a need to refer a student for an evaluation. For example, an LEA may not deny or delay initial evaluations because previous interventions have not been implemented. We love MTSS and RTI. Those are very important, but you can't deny or delay an evaluation simply because that process hasn't been followed. Consider the various needs a student with an identified disability may need in one of the 13 categories. It's that contingency planning. And special education students or general education students first, and most will receive special education or related services in the general education setting. Therefore, one of the things that I'm always really curious about reading is how you plan to have your special education and your general education staff collaborate. So who can make a referral for special education? Parents or any legal guardian, school personnel, or any other person that is involved in the education or care of the child. Lastly, these are some sticking points. Referrals can be made verbally. They're not required to be in writing. So if someone says in the carpool lane, I think my child needs an evaluation, they just triggered a timeline for you. LEAs must respond within 15 days to that request. And before an evaluation can begin, a parent must be notified and provided procedural safeguards. An LEA may not deny or delay a referral for an initial evaluation because pre-referral interventions have not been implemented with the student. There are a lot of dates and timelines that must be tracked for state reporting. Many new charter schools hire contract staff to do evaluations. Like I said before, that's great, but you need to know that they are following state and federal timelines by providing reports on this kind of data and have procedures that help you verify that they're meeting these timelines. The ARD committee is responsible for the IEP development and decision-making during the ARD committee. IEPs must be reviewed at least annually and more often as appropriate. As appropriate may include lack of progress towards annual goals, reevaluation results, eligibility determination, or any other matter that to meet the student's anticipated needs. What your graphic here shows is here are all of the people that should be at an ARD meeting, and here are all the people that may be at an ARD meeting. So blue is a must, purple is a may. Specially designed instruction. Specially designed instruction means that you're adapting the content or methodology or delivery of instruction to address the student's unique needs and to ensure the student has access to the general education curriculum. Remember that this can get tricky on who's providing those services real fast when you're thinking about your certified staff. Transportation, it can be a related service. Therefore, if the ARD committee determines the student will require transportation to meet the needs of services described in the IEP, then transportation must be provided by your LEA. Sorry, I didn't realize I had the graphic there. There you go. That just shows you the words that came out of my mouth. And then we keep this site updated. This is our new technical assistance site. Educational researchers and leaders in the field of, are collaborating with the Texas Education Agency to develop timely, meaningful, and appropriate and high quality resources to guide educators in supporting our students. Our learning library contains unique opportunities for educators to participate in online courses, workshops, events, and conferences. We really refer to this as a choose your own adventure sort of site. You really can search for what you're needing and the type of resource that you need. And a lot of the training opportunities are free and available. We also highlight all of our opportunities to sign up for updates and make sure that you are attending webinars. Regulations change. They change this summer, and you have to stay up to date on what's required both federally and state for special education. So I would make sure that you have someone appointed to monitor your special education program internally, and I'd make sure that they are continuously engaging with an ESE or someone to stay up to date on what laws and policies change. My team is mighty. My director is Lori Merrill. I am the manager. I have Janelle Weber, Morgan Hubbard, and Christina Jones. We are the people that support special education monitoring. Of course, there are a lot of program folks, but if you are engaging in the monitoring process, you are probably engaging with one of us. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this time and open it up to any questions. It's a lot of information in a very short amount of time.
Doesn't look like there's any questions in the Q&A function just yet. So if you have some questions, feel free to put them in there.
All right.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Papas. Remember, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and send those in the Q&A. And if she leaves us now, then you can send her an email, or we'd be more than happy to help you out. And you can also attend office hours on November 21st at 1 p.m. Next, we're going to go ahead and have Dr. Rocha. She's going to help present on emergent bilingual. I'll let you go ahead and take it away. Thank you, Scarlett.
And before you go, Dr. Rocha, we just want to ground what you're going to present. John, if you want to pop our screen back up, thank you so much. So this is, again, coming from your instruction and guidance. You do have access to this information. For emergent bilingual students, we want to make sure we're identifying the adequate number of staff, as well as support staff, identifying the specific bilingual education program models where they're following compliance. And lastly, making sure that EB students have access to grade level academic content and ensuring equitable access across the context of the school. So just know that that is in your instruction and guidance, so you're able to kind of ground what Dr. Rocha is going to talk about. And Dr. Rocha, you should be able to share your screen, and I will pass it over to you.
Thank you all, and good afternoon, muy buenas tardes. Let me share my screen. And can you see my screen? Perfecto. And I know the timing, we have 30 minutes, correct? Or a little bit?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. So just very similar to what you heard, Dr. Papas, in regards to equitable opportunities for emergent bilingual students, we always like to ground ourselves also in our true north, which we call our goal. But this is our small but mighty team, and it in the foreseeable future, we continue to grow that team simply because we also have an understanding that our emergent bilingual students are also growing across our beautiful state of Texas. So as you all are thinking of your charter school, thinking about how you're going to support and provide that access to our bilingual students as well. So our goal is to really lead the state with intentionality. We have started conversations around blueprint level. So really thinking about as school districts, charter schools, districts of innovations are really thinking about curriculum, professional development, and any type of resources for their students. It all includes emergent bilingual students, and therefore the bilingual or ESL program requirements or resources needed to really support EB students reach that academic success. And therefore, we are grounded in the fact that all of our students in the state of Texas deserve this equitable opportunity if high quality programming and high quality instructional materials. So in today's topic, short timing, we're going to talk about EB students in Texas and why the importance of equitable access, because as we see, 1 of every 4 students are identified as emergent bilingual students. And why do we have so many standardized forms and requirements, state and federally? It's because of a legislative impact. And we'll talk a little bit about our EB team and hence the resources that we are providing to our school districts across the state. We'll talk a little bit about the LPAC processes and why it is important to have appropriately certified teachers in those classroom spaces, because that impacts instruction and therefore the linguistic supports for our emergent bilingual students, and how that instructional approach that all in linguistic supports includes general education classrooms, and it is not an intervention, and what are some of the resources that we recommend for to be utilized in those spaces as well. And hopefully, like my colleague, Dr. Papas, we'll have some time for questions if there is any. And I'm sure that the wonderful team of Charter Division will be able to cue me or let us know as well. So just very quickly, I know that we've shared this before, but just in really thinking about how you are developing and curating your resources and even positions for those that will be supporting emergent bilingual students, that our name has changed from English language learner to emergent bilingual students here in Texas. And we've also seen that change already happening in any school platform when it comes to coding and identifying the population that you serve. So it is now an EB student or an emergent bilingual student. In some of our resources, you will continue to see English learner, EL, simply because we do receive federal guidance and federal monies, and therefore they use the term nationwide as EL. Very quickly, why it is urgency is because, as you see, and I won't go too deep into this, but just as you can see, the significant growth of emergent bilingual students throughout every single year, and we anticipate this growth to continue to be evident as we continue to serve our EB students across our state. It used to be 1 of every 5 students. Now it's 1 of every 4 students that is identified as an emergent bilingual student. So if you meet the demographics required, then it will depict which program model you will be implementing to serve your EBs. We also want to announce that even though they're emergent bilingual students, they're come with lots of assets, linguistic and cultural assets, and therefore intelligent, brilliant young minds that are also could be duly identified, special education, and therefore parents not feeling the priority of choosing one program over the other. You should be able to provide both program services to give the students a whole-rounded, high quality education, including gifted and talented students. They also deserve to be able to be in bilingual or ESL classroom spaces, depending on the required bilingual program. So when we do have these conversations, we always ask, what is your number of emergent bilingual students? How many are identified as EB students and duly identified, gifted, newcomers? And then, of course, for higher grades, the CTE courses available for our students. Overall, there's right now currently 1,202 districts that includes charters, that includes districts of innovations across our beautiful state, and 99% of them have one or many emergent bilingual students. These are our bilingual education programs in Texas. You'll see them referred to as 6 state-approved programs, but we want to really emphasize that bilingual education encompasses both bilingual programming and ESL programming. So here's just a kind of a visual of letting you know, like, these are the 6 program models: the dual language, transitional, ESL, and they go in order based on the amount of partner language introduced and continued. Like for dual language programming, we know that the goal is biliteracy, and that is the one that the legislative session has identified as the most asset-based, the most additive, and the most successful that yields student outcomes for our EB students. And therefore, they have a great emphasis on our funding and implications on the resources that we also provide. That leads me to legislative impact. So even though our emergent bilingual team is small and there's lots of statute and rule that you may hear, everything is driven based on legislative impact that depicts the instruction in the classroom space, the bilingual programming, the funding, state and federally, and then of course the family and community empowerment as well. In our strategic plan, you're going to see our kind of ask or task in regards to supporting schools increase bilingual certified teachers. So as you're thinking of those placements, the requirement is appropriately certified bilingual for bilingual programs or ESL for ESL programs. An increase in dual language education. So if you have the numbers to start a bilingual program, that is an ask also as well. From pre-K to 12, we want to see that number increasing in educator and parent awareness, signage of the school, communication for parents as well, and of course the professional development for bilingual or leaders in the campus spaces as well. This is the most important one: adopt a uniform process for identification and reclassification and placement of our students. And you'll see some standardized letters that are required to be implemented and also uploaded if you're going on a virtual platform. Increasing bilingual and multilingual graduates. So these 5 calls are what drives our work every single day. For example, you'll be able to leverage, if we're thinking about highly recruiting, hiring, and retaining appropriately bilingual or ESL certified teachers in our charter school, what does that look like? And how do we build that capacity? So there is a cyclical process for bilingual exceptions and ESL waivers. If you find yourself that we were unable to fill one position and therefore have to file and report to the agency that we do not have an appropriately certified teacher, what are some steps to take and what are the plan of action throughout that 1 year to really support the teachers and hold the accountability of the charter to ensure that there's linguistic and academic growth for those EB students. We have partnered throughout our certification and the teacher incentive allotment school programs to ensure that these teachers are also captured in any type of incentivization to ensure that you are retaining those high quality teachers. And then, of course, we have plenty of resources that you can access for free, the teachers can access for free to be in that course pathway of the bilingual or ESL certification. For dual language programming, if that is the bilingual program that you will be implementing, please know there is a significant additional funding that you will get. In the image on the left, you will see that emergent bilingual students participating in a dual language program model not only accumulate the regular state funded, which is $616, but also an additional 0.05, which will give you an equivalent of $924. And if you're participating or implementing a two-way dual language program model, then the incentivization also is given to non-EB students. So if you tally that up for the number of students that you have served by an appropriately certified teacher, that is a significant amount of money that will be able to not only provide the high quality instructional materials in the classroom space, but also the resources and tools the teacher will need to build that high capacity of second language acquisition delivery. Our dual language framework, alongside with our transitional bilingual programming rubric and our ESL framework, also provide an extensive amount of support when it comes to effective implementation, which is also in statute in regards to every single year. You are tasked to evaluate your program, and if the EB students are yielding the outcomes that they are, that's great. What are some of the practices that you are doing well as deeming the program of implementation effective? And if it's not, what are some areas of focus that we can consider to ensure that we are providing, again, the best practices and equal opportunity for our emergent bilingual students? We are aligning our dual language programs. It's not only a program of language, but it's high cognitive and therefore really spiraling into why dual language? It's an education. It's education first and foremost for our emergent bilingual students to really increase the self-esteem, to really create higher order thinking skills that of course will lead them to content mastery, and then of course develop two languages through content area materials. And then of course that will give you your greater student outcomes. To increase educator and parental awareness, that's also some of the things that we ask in regards to how are you supporting the communication between the emergent bilingual student and the emergent bilingual students' families, and also the preparation for not only the leaders in those spaces, but also those that serve, like support staff. Do they know the program of implementation? Because they're your number one customer service, the first people that see your parents and families and be able to answer, this is the program that we have or we're implementing to serve our emergent bilingual students. We have videos that you can access and give access to families also so that they also learn about the benefits of bilingualism, whether it is a dual language, transitional, or an ESL program, depending on which one you would select to better serve your EB students. There is a high reach for our families. We always welcome any speaking language. We know that we serve over 130 different languages across the state. And as you're recruiting all students, and therefore you may have a variation of languages as well. So we are creating spaces to speak to families, to speak to leaders in regards to how, and with oftentimes interpreters on site, to be able to build that awareness and to help parents understand what you all are doing in the campus spaces to serve their child. Of course, there's LPAC, and we'll talk a little bit more about that requirement, and a lot of content-based language instruction resources to support and provide teachers the tools that they need for tomorrow in delivery of high-quality instruction. And this is the meat of it, right? The Adopt a Uniform Process of Identification, Placement, and Reclassification. The state has approved a language assessment that will give us the identification, that is the pre-loss or the lost links, depending on the age of the child. And it is typically done right after you receive a brand new student that has never attended a Texas public school system. You administer the home language survey, which will then yield that assessment to be taken. And that's the only assessment in Texas. We also have standardized letters, including the home language survey, any type of bilingual placement or ESL placement letters that will specifically speak to the goals of each one of those programs. The reclassification or the continuation of programs, if there's a dual language program, for example, or an exiting of a program. The parents have the choice of accepting or denying, but very important to have these letters available for parents and for them to know what these letters are, because it's going to help you also in perpetuity in regards to when you have their children there. As an example, even if a parent denies bilingual or ESL services, the child is still going to be liable to take the language assessment in Texas, which is the TELPAS, and therefore what does instruction look like for the child, even if the child is not being served by a bilingual or ESL teacher, which is something that the U.S. Department of Education kind of said, this is the child's civil right for language services. The state-approved reclassification assessment is Riverside Insights, and that, of course, depending on the grade level the child is at, where there is no star assessment, like for 1st, 2nd, 11th, and 12th, and that is the only measure or assessment that we take in order for a child to be placed under a reclassification or to reclassify. As you're thinking of how these forms are going to live or going to be processed, they can either be in person, and then that copy or that document, hard copy, lives in your cumulative folder alongside with your LPAC folder. Both folders are together, are always combined, and are kept in the same location under lock and key as any cumulative folder. If you are going to be a 100% online charter, then that's perfectly fine. We just ask that the same way that you house or you keep your cumulative folder, the LPAC is archived in the same way, in the same fashion, and that parents are also given the opportunity to navigate those letters in different languages. Please know that we have those standardized letters ready for you to utilize and upload into those platforms in home language survey in 90 different languages, 92 actually, and we have the packets for all the other letters right now in totality for up to 75 different languages. So you don't have to translate, you'll have those also at your fingertips in our portal. And number 5 is really to increase the benefits of bilingualism and to graduate more bilingual and multilingual graduates. So we created a pathway to support. And some of the questions that we'll ask is, how are you increasing the opportunities for your students, even as early as pre-K, kinder, 5th grade, and so that they're ready for middle school and high school, and that they're recognized for those achievements. Teachers that are going to be in your lower grades, what pathway will they take in their reading academies? Are they going to take the English if they're only teaching the English pieces, or recommendation for the biliteracy pathway? Because partner language and English may have approximations, but they're not taught in the same way. So that's also important when we visit, is we're really looking into, if you are a bilingual program, how is that biliteracy looking for in regards to building capacity for teachers? Of course, CTE pathways, dual language yields that pathway for student to teacher pipelines. But the goal for the agency is to really have every student be college, career, and military ready. And therefore, we continue to make cross-agency collaboration to ensure that everything that is going out there to district leaders, campus leaders, charter leaders is that research-based instructional materials, high-quality instructional materials, teacher campus observation tools, frameworks, etc., that everything is EB students is at the blueprint level alongside with our special population colleagues. And then, of course, we are always in the campaign of building awareness of the benefits of bilingualism. So signage in campuses is super important. And we always ask, even if you're not implementing a bilingual program, that signage is representative of the languages that you serve in that community. For LPAC process, it is the LPAC's responsibility that the members, 3 members, come together to make informed decisions during every single meeting for initial identification, which is the beginning of the year, Or if you're recruiting a student that has already been in another Texas school district, how are we going to either honor, or do we need to provide a different consent letter because the program is different than what they were coming in from, or they were receiving in their sending school district. The middle of the year for assessment purposes and tracking their linguistic and academic progress. And then, of course, at the end of the year, how the students did linguistic and academic growth, and what are the data elements to see. So those are important conversations, because the more your LPAC knows, the more proximity they have to teachers and informed with the data at hand. For the LPAC committee is the LPAC administrator. Usually it is the school's assistant principal, but it should be a campus administrator. It's either the bilingual, if you're a bilingual program, or the ESL teacher, if you're implementing an ESL program. And the parent of an emergent bilingual student that has consented for their child to receive the language services in either one of those programs. The LPAC is responsible to ensuring that you're always collecting data that informs linguistic versus content, because there's two different things. Like, for example, the STAR only measures content attainment. There's programs that you may utilize for comprehension and reading fluency that may only measure the content, but not necessarily the linguistics. So what are things that you're utilizing to ensure that you're measuring both partner language and English when it comes to bilingual programming? And then, of course, LPAC will also be including all students that are identified as AD students, including those that are with parental denial and being served in general ed classrooms with a teacher that is non-certified. Those students are still, you will still be responsible to meet the state and federal requirements when it comes to the identification, placement, reclassification, and monitoring. So these are the visual of the LPAC committee for bilingual program, and of course the LPAC for the ESL program. One of the other things that are another person that can be part of those conversations before and during is your if the student is a special education student, that is the art committee, the 504, the GT, or any other committee that can give you to-date data that will inform those decision making. Making sure that those documents are archived. This is a sample of our home language survey. There is a reason as to why it is longer this year. It's simply because it is collecting more information, because we really want to capture what the child is surrounded with, whether the language or languages the child is receiving at home is listening at home. There is videos to share with parents before they actually sign, and there is a stipulation as to what are the 2 ways this home language survey can be edited if your child has not been assessed for language services, or 2, if it has been within the 2 calendar weeks that the child enrolled in your charter. So that information is critical to receiving funding for every one of your emergent bilingual students. Once the home language survey is collected, the LPAC moves on to identify and look if the child is deemed as English proficient, then the child will then not be a non-emergent bilingual student. But if the child scores that they less than proficient, that means that they still need linguistic support and therefore identified as an emergent bilingual student. It is important, this last bullet here is that every support staff understands the importance of the home language survey, and that parents are making those decisions on their own and not necessarily told. Like, for example, if you write another language, your child is going to be tested and therefore be considered an emergent bilingual student, because we do not know that. Right? It's not until the assessment is taken, and that's what will give us a more accurate information for the LPAC to decide whether the child will be identified as an emergent bilingual student. Once the identification is done, then there's another documentation in order in the LPAC folder, which will identify LPAC has made the initial identification, and this is the recommendation. If you are a bilingual program, because you meet the rule of 20 students of the same language in the same grade level, then you are required to implement a bilingual program, and that should be the first recommendation from LPAC. Even though you may offer an ESL program, in tandem with bilingual program. The bilingual program may be Spanish, English, and the ESL for Vietnamese, Mandarin, or other languages that you do not meet the rule of 20, then you still are required for those bilingual program partner languages that you have to first recommend that placement. If the parent denies services for bilingual program, for example, and accepts ESL, LPAC does not need to reconvene because it will track the process. The first recommendation was bilingual. If the parent accepts, great. If the parent denies bilingual but accepts ESL, that is the actual concrete order or chain of events that will support you when we're looking at documentation as well. And then finally, please know that the reclassification criteria has changed in the past couple of years in Texas. One being the TELPAS is no longer by proficiency domain, like advanced high in every listening, speaking, reading, and writing, but it is a composite score. It is a passing a star, 40 percentile in the Iowa, and a teacher subjective evaluation. If you remember earlier today, I mentioned that the U.S. Department of Education pretty much told the state of Texas that we are to continue providing services even to students that are in parental denial. So we have changed all of our resources to reflect that. But two, it should not impede a child from reclassifying if the child receives linguistic supports. So during a STAR assessment, for example, for 3rd, 4th, and 5th and beyond, if the LPAC feels that the child will benefit from the language supports, that should not impede the child from reclassification. And then, of course, the last thing is monitoring. Monitoring at the end of the school year to ensure that the students are being successful in an all-English environment with no linguistic supports. So pretty much those are our best, those are our 5 goals, and we have plenty of resources for instructional approach, like, for example, how to file for an exception and waiver, and the 4 cyclical processes for better outcomes for students and teachers. This is just an example of what you will see in that guidance. And we are pretty much giving you a cyclical process by month. This is a new updated guidance on the TAA that every single student that is identified as AB, regardless of the environment, deserves equitable opportunity. And these are just examples of how that would look like in each one of the classrooms, whether it is dual language with parental consent, ESL, or with a parental denial. The key of them all, and you don't see it here, they're not bolded, but it's really CBLI. And that is the one piece that we are trying to advertise, is that we have the resources in our portal that every single student, regardless, deserves scaffolding as necessary for language and academic growth. And this is how it looks like for our emergent bilingual students. It is tier 1 instruction. And that's all I have. And this is our emergent bilingual support inbox. You are always welcome to ask us any questions. And then, of course, this is our portal, which has a plethora of tools for principals, educators, families, you name it. You have it there in different languages as well. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, Dr. Rocha. It does look like we have one question. It's asking, does the bilingual program rule of 20 apply to high schools as well?
No, it's only pre-K through 5th grade unless you're implementing a dual language program pre-K-12. Great question.
All right, y'all, we have 1 minute left in today's session. So any more questions in the Q&A? John, I saw you come off of mute. Did you want to add something?
No, just always appreciate the conversation.
Can EB staff be covered by year 0 CSP? So that might be a question, Dr. Rocha, if you don't know, that might be for Nathaniel Johnson, our CSP manager. And so I can get that email for you in the chat, and I'm sure he'd be more than happy to go over allowable and unallowable costs. So let me get that. Let me see if there's any
I'll
more.
put it in the chat for you.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate the time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rocha. It doesn't look like there's any more questions. If we get any more, we'll go ahead and flag them for you. And I appreciate you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll see you. Bye-bye.
And thank you so much to everyone who joined this session today. This is recorded and will be posted. Again, please allow us some time to make sure that's posted to the website. Additionally, please join us in our November 21st office hours. They will start at 1 o'clock. That link is already posted on the charter applicant page. Team, do you have anything else you want to add?
No.
Wonderful. All right, y'all. Well, y'all have a great week and we hope to see you at office hours.